Hi there, Dance Studio owners. Clint Salter here, founder of the Dance Studio Owners Association, and welcome to a very special podcast event. Over the next 8 weeks, you're going to be hearing from dance studio owners Angela and Jody about how you can grow your dance studio in this very special series we're calling Elevate Your Studio. Over these next 8 episodes, you're going to be hearing ideas about how you can get more creative in the classroom. We're going to be talking about recitals. Angela and Jody are jumping in how to have spectacular summer camps. They're going to be talking about creating an exceptional customer experience, how you can maximize your musical theater programming, how you can promote a positive body image inside of the classroom, out of the box marketing ideas, and they're going to tell you about their absolute failures that they've had in their dance studio and how to avoid them. You're in for an amazing 8 weeks. Elevate Your Studio with Angela and Jody starts now.
Elevate Your Studio with Angela and Jody, finding the joy in studio ownership. I'm Jody Schilling.
And I'm not Angela Manella Hoffman with a very deep voice. This is Sean Little. I'm Jody Schilling's husband.
Sean was kind enough to step in for Angela this week. Our hearts go out to Angela and her family. Angela just lost her mother, and this is a very, very difficult time for her, and we send her love and strength as she goes through this really, really tough time.
And my heart's just broken for her. I know how hard it is to lose a parent. Both of us, Jody and I, have each lost our mother. I've also lost my father, and I'm sure many listeners have lost close family members. So I'm sure people can understand why Angela couldn't be here to do the podcast.
But we love you, Angela, and if you're listening, I hope we do you proud. Today's episode is fantastic fails and what we learned from them. And oh my goodness, there's been a few.
There's been a few. One of my favorite things is the fail videos on YouTube. And I think it's interesting that so many of those tend, the ones where people are hurting themselves tend to be men. So so this is interesting. Now we get to sort of see how a female, or at least in this situation, deals with a fail.
and I'm really putting myself out there because, it's a little humbling to be like, and this is all of my mess ups. But I'm hoping that you can learn from them like I have. I actually am really grateful for all the things that I have royally screwed up because they've been great life lessons, and the studio wouldn't be where it is unless I've made so many mistakes.
But to your credit, I think you have far fewer fails now than you did 10 years ago when we started. And speaking of when we started, that's when there were the most of the learning curve. So let's start at the beginning with how you got everything started. What were the very beginning steps of opening your studio?
Well, unlike most people, I jump into things head on, big time. I don't go small. I build the plane as I'm flying it. It's called a quick start, and I have it in spades. So I started the studio. This is ridiculous, with a 6,000 square foot space, and I didn't have a single student lined up. I remember sitting in the lobby the day I opened my doors, thinking that people would just magically show up. We even had multiple people with iPads ready to take the onslaught of customers, and not a single one walked through the door for a couple of weeks. It was just awful.
I think I even remember asking you, is that really how this works? On the opening day, you open the doors and people just line up and register, and you seem pretty confident that was the way it was going to work. And I thought, well, what do I know? Okay.
I've since learned, it's not enough to put a couple ads out. Yeah. And to start, I wish I would have scaled up to what we currently have, because it was tough getting students from scratch. It was really tough.
So tell me about the challenges of just finding a space and just kind of getting a studio ready to open up the doors.
Well, in Los Angeles, in particular, there is a lot of red tape when you start a business, and if you're changing the use of the building, which is what we ended up having to do because you need a warehouse type building. You need a big space for a dance studio, and I found one. But I had to change the use with building and safety, and that was.
I think it was originally like an office space or something.
I think it was it was like offices, but it was like for like telemarketing. It was
a bunch of cubicles. And, I
there's
remember landlines. Like there is a LAN port every 6 feet along the wall.
It's pretty ridiculous. So we had to go to building and safety and say what we wanted to change it to.
And have blueprints drawn up. Fortunately, your previous job was actually working for an architect, so kind of had an in there.
Yeah, that is another random story because I know nothing about architecture, but God lines these things up, pretty cool.
And the thing I remember that frustrated me about that is we would get the blueprints and then we'd go down to the building and safety to have them approved. And I remember talking to, I don't know if fire marshal is the right title, but it was a person in charge of our fire safety. And they'd look at our plans and they go, you need to change this wall. This wall needs to be moved 3 feet for the easement or whatever. And we'd be like, okay, is that it? That's all we need to do. It's just that one thing. Mm-hmm. All right, great. And so we'd go back and we'd get the change. And then we'd come back and go, look, we changed the wall. And then he'd say, oh, and then you also need to put an exit sign over here. And then I'd be like, okay, wait a minute. Why didn't you tell us that last time? Could you just tell us everything? And they'd say, no, fix this thing. And then, so they would only tell us, they'd only give us the information to fix things like one thing at a time.
We had this amazing contractor referred to us, and this family attends Releve now. They had no children when they were.
Actually, I think his wife was pregnant.
His wife was pregnant
when they were doing the build out.
When they were doing our build out. And now they have 4 or 5 girls, all girls that attend the studio now. And I say this with love. They were great contractors, but you guys, they were Jewish, and we hired them during the high holidays. They were building out the studio in August and September. And so everything took so long because they can't work on the holidays and not on Saturdays or not on Fridays. So that was something that I did not consider. But they are such good people, and I know that the build out cost so much more than what the bid was for.
So many things that we could not anticipate.
And it took a lot longer. Oh, some of the things we didn't anticipate was like the city saying, we need to check your sewers.
Oh, yeah. And there was some sort of coupling in our pipe that prevented it. Like we had to basically have a camera run through our sewer system so that an inspector could look at the closed circuit video and make sure the sewer is in good shape. And there was some sort of coupling that prevented the camera from going through. And it was maybe 15 feet underneath the floor into the ground. And I really wish we had a photo of this, because we had in the middle of one of our dance rooms about a 15-foot in diameter hole that was about 15 feet deep, this giant pile of dirt that was, They
came and drilled a hole into our floor just to see if this pipe had good flow. And they got to it and they said, well, this is the cleanest pipe we've ever seen.
Yeah, that cost thousands of dollars to find out that a perfectly good working order sewer system was exactly that. So.
And that was just the beginning of the problems.
So what else would you say you just learned about just kind of getting the business going, just with getting vendors and, staff and all those other sort of people in line?
My first huge lesson, and I should have known this, I should have known it, was to get everything in writing and contracted. my mom was friends with these people, and they said, we know someone who can really help you with this build out and like the change of use and all of this stuff, and she'd love to just help you. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice of her. That's so great. And so she tried to help me, and she couldn't. She didn't really help at all. And then a week later, I got this invoice for a couple $1,000s. And I'm like, oh, I thought you were going to help. I thought this was help.
It was a different definition of help. Yeah. I'll be the hired help.
Yeah.
Right? And there was a little miscommunication there. What did you learn from that lesson?
I quickly learned that people are usually out for themselves and their own best interests.
Yeah. I would say that. I think most people are out for their own best interests.
Yeah. And
exactly. As are you and me.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
although
it's like, yeah.
I do think that I do help a lot of people just out of the goodness of my own heart. And I think that's why I messed it up, is because not everyone thinks like I do.
I think the big mistake when people don't get like a contract or something in writing is they think that it's something that's, you know, if I ask you for something in writing, it's almost like I don't trust you. But really, it's just to make sure that we're on the same page, that we're in agreement with all, you know, with what I'm going to do. You know, and I used to love like the People's Court and all these court shows, you know, and the thing that I learned about that is, you know, contracts it's a two-way street. You know, it's really a matter of like, I'm going to give you this, and this is what you're going to give me in return. And it's, you know, it should be, you know, it's a business transaction really. And it should be looked at that and not as a personal slight because you want to put it in writing.
Yeah. It's not going to offend anyone to ask for a contract. And I learned that in the very first week of business.
Now, one of the things I will say that, you know, when you said, hey, I want to open up a dance studio, I remember asking you repeatedly, really? Do you really want to deal with crazy parents? And
I said, sure. Yeah, I'm really calm. People like me. I'm really soothing. No one gets mad at me.
And, you know, when I say crazy, I mean, parents are crazy, and I'm a parent, and I'm crazy. And I say this because you can't help but be a crazy person when you're put in charge of a human being.
That you love so much.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So please don't take offense when I call parents crazy, because I'm talking about myself as well. I was like, is that really something you want to deal with? And she's like, oh, this is not going to be a problem. So tell me, what did you learn about dealing with crazy parents?
That it is not as easy as I thought. And it takes a lot of training to problem solve and keep things non-escalated and to handle customer service. That I am still learning about that, but I've learned so much.
Let me see. I'm trying to figure out, I know that lots of times, especially early on, you're so desperate to get enough students, enough clients that you can just to pay the bills. Mm-hmm. That there's probably a lot of clients that you take on, or I should say that you hold on to that you probably should not. Yeah.
And that was a tough lesson. 3 or 4 years in, you've developed relationship, but then you realize that that maybe not everyone is the right fit for your studio culture. Mm-hmm. That they may be doing more harm being at your studio mm-hmm. than just cutting them free and letting them find somewhere that's better suited for them. Mm-hmm.
Tell me, like, what are some red flags that you look for when you have a parent or a client, or that, you know, what are the red flags to look for when you think maybe this is someone that doesn't belong at my studio?
Yeah, this took me a while to learn. One thing that's a red flag for me is when any parent excessively butters me up or buys me gifts. I'm not talking about just like a gift at holiday time. I'm talking about bringing me food 2 or 3 times a week.
Is that something that actually happened?
I had a mother making me like sweets that I don't even eat and bringing them 2 or 3 times a week, gifts, like expensive gifts. And at first I was like, oh, wow. And then it started making me feel really uncomfortable, and I'd see her do it with other students. And this was probably one of my most devastating interactions with parents is what this parent did to my studio eventually. It was trouble.
So did the favors, they started asking for favors, or can my child be in the front of the dance? Can I have a special part in the, in the choreography, that sort of thing, a solo here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what they were doing with me, they were doing with other parents, and
what do you mean?
Got like a posse of parents.
Oh, I see.
Eventually,
like they try to take their side, or
yeah. So I'm also very weary of studio hoppers now, because they'll come to you with a sob story from the previous studio that I never want to hear.
And if they're so willing to leave one studio, if they weren't loyal to their previous studio, why would they be loyal to your studio?
And it's true that a very bad thing could have happened at the previous studio, but if they've been at several studios in a row and they're having a hard time assimilating at any...
and what's the common common factor between those? Right?
So I'm a little weary of new students that have hopped around a little bit.
But then again, on the other hand, I mean, it is a matter of trying to find the studio that's the right culture.
And on the reverse flip side, I've had some great students come from other studios that maybe were just looking for something slightly different. And they were never a problem.
But still something to be leery of, or something
but
to be
I think it's because I got bit early on that
that
I'm just always going to have a little hesitation. I watch people in my parking lot. Parent huddles in the parking lot are always a bad sign. I just walk right up to it and I take it. What's going on? And I get right in there and see what the trouble is now. I used to avoid it like, oh no, they're upset. But now I'll walk right into it and say, what's going on, guys? How can I help you?
And you would recommend that?
And I do. Cut it off fast. Cut it off fast. What else?
What are some of the other kind of, I just sort of asked about red flags about parents, but what are some other activities or things to look out for, when you're just to try to, curb that discourse that you might have with parents that are, seem to be unhappy or...
Well, I think it starts with communication, which I've had to really work on, because it's, I usually move at such a quick pace that I don't always communicate clearly. And that's why I have this amazing studio manager, and I try to surround myself by people who are the opposite of me. There's this really great book called Rocket Fuel. And it basically says that with every great business, there's kind of two people. There's like the visionary, and then there's the person who can make things happen and keep you organized. And
you're the visionary.
I'm the visionary,
right.
And my studio manager, Lori Hayball, before her, Catherine Gaffney, they were, and you are actually fall in that category. Very organized, can flesh out a clear picture of step-by-step processes. I need that to keep my communication clear to the parents, because if you head it off at the pass, you're clear in your communication from the very get-go with handbooks, and this is what's going to happen, and these are our values, and this is our mission. And if everyone knows that, you can cut a lot of the drama out very early. It never even happens because everyone knows where the boat is heading. So,
all right. So I have a couple follow-up questions on that. So you got that parking lot conversation, you step into it, and let's say that they open up to you and they have a legitimate gripe. They've got a problem with something. We don't like the way you're doing X, Y, and Z. And you think about it and you go, yeah, that's probably something So how do you handle that sort of situation when people have a gripe and it's a legitimate concern that they should be, that's totally reasonable?
I always welcome feedback, and especially legitimate gripes, because I want my studio to be the best it possibly can be. I may not have the answer right away for them. So I usually will say, I have heard you. This is what I've heard. Let me think on it and get some advice on it. I'll come back to you with kind of my solution and run it by you. If you like it, let's implement it. And I've done that many times, not just with parents, but also instructors who can see a way to better the studio or operations. And definitely with our studio manager, you've come to me with suggestions to make the studio better and operations better. And though I don't always listen to you on the first try.
Yeah, usually you won't listen to me until somebody else has the same idea. And
And
you're
that-
like, can you come to me and go,
And
hey, let's listen to this great idea. And I go, I've been telling you that for years and you've ignored it until somebody else.
you guys, it's Clint. I have to be honest that unless Clint says it, that I won't listen. And Sean will be like, I told you that years ago. And I'm like, but Clint said it. And he's like, ah.
No, I guess so. You got to consider the source. But back to my question, or just to on your answer of like, you don't necessarily have to give them a solution right then. I mean, that's great. And lots of times, really all they want is to be heard.
Yes.
Which you have to ask, like, well, if you want to be heard, why didn't you just come to me in the first place?
Well, because we're all human.
Yeah.
And and I'll do the same thing. If I'm going to be honest, like if I'm upset with our daughter's teacher or some situation, I don't always go to the source of what is troubling me. Like I'll fester on it a little bit. Like it's just kind of human nature. I try not to, but we're all human. And everyone feels better once they've been heard.
Well, then now I have to do the flip side. So now how do you handle it when the parents are coming to you with something that's completely unreasonable? That's just like, the thing that comes to mind is like, oh, I know you don't allow midriffs. And so if they're like, well, my daughters, we want our daughters to show their midriffs. Why can't they show their midriffs? Have a nice midriff.
Well, I think if you're very, very clear on your policies and your whys and your values, you can go to this source that you've created, but you can be like, well, it says here in the values, no midriffs because of A, B, and C. These are the reasons at this studio that we don't do that. If you want to stay here, this is the rule. I understand if this isn't for you. Like, I can help you find another studio. I know a lot of great studios in the area, but we attract a certain tribe. So, and a lot of times, most people are very reasonable. And if they hear a well thought out response, we don't do that because of X, Y, Z. Most people are very logical and they understand and they're like, oh, you have thought about it.
Yeah. And then again, sometimes it just goes back to wanting to be heard and just kind of feeling valued.
Yeah.
I think that goes a long way. Now, that takes me to this next question of like, sometimes the complaint is about an instructor, which puts you in a difficult situation because you want to, you also have to sort of get that weird thing of you got to protect your instructor, but at the same time, you've got to, so you're kind of stuck between,
Well, I'm always going to back my instructors if they're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
If there is something that is not acceptable, then that has to be addressed with the instructor. And we've had that happen,
Has it ever come down to it, something where they'll accuse the instructor of something and then the instructor says, I never did that. And then,
yes.
Then what do you do in that situation?
That has happened. A lot of times we have multiple people in the rooms. Like we never have just usually one instructor and one student. We also have the cameras in every studio. We had this instance where a student said that an instructor grabbed by the shoulders and moved them quickly into the position, and it kind of jarred them and scared them. And you could review the footage and see that it never happened. So
like they didn't even grab the
They
student?
didn't even touch them.
Oh, wow.
And the parent was like, oh. And then it turned around and the student was mortified and apologized and blah, blah, blah. And it all turned out okay. Like
they embellish the story, not realizing that there's an actual record of what
well, that's
really
the
happened.
thing. When emotions are high and kids and teens, like they're still developing their brains. Like they're just, they sometimes they don't even know what is embellished and what isn't because they've worked themselves up so much. So, yeah.
Let me see. I'm trying to think. So here, have you ever talked about in fact, it's funny. I was thinking about this just today about how we used to have to chase the money.
Oh.
I know that, one of the things that shocked me is, we had some clientele that come from, they're immigrants from countries that bartering is a very common part of their culture, and so they come in and try to barter, or not barter. I guess barter is not the right word. What's the word where you try to negotiate? Haggle. Barter, I guess, is where you exchange goods and services, instead of necessarily money. But that they'd come in and haggle or. So
we just never gave into that. But with money, one of my biggest mistakes, and this was a tough one. This was when my mom was fighting cancer and you and I left to go take care of my mom. And I left the studio in the hands of my instructors and studio manager. And I was very hands off. I just couldn't handle it.
Right.
And while I was gone, an account went up to owing us about $18,000. And I don't know how that happened. And I take responsibility because though I was not there when it was happening and it kept creeping up, I didn't ever check in on it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came back after my mom had passed and I came back to this, realizing I had an account that owed me, I think $18,000 and another one that owed me $6,000.
Which is a lot. $20,000
That is a lot
of money. I mean, that's
money
a couple
for
of
a
payrolls.
month. Yeah, a couple of payrolls. That was rough. That was really rough. I felt taken advantage of, but I didn't follow up. It's my own fault.
How have you turned that around?
So now we don't let accounts get over a certain amount, and
you do auto debit, right?
And we do auto
Which
debit.
I'm sure is probably something you've already talked
now
about.
Everyone is on auto debit, and to collect that payment, which is almost paid down, we gave them. They've paid interest on it. They had some different options we gave them, and we sought legal advice, and we had a contract made up, and so they had 3 years to pay it down, and it was with interest. And now it's down to just a couple thousand that they owe.
And that's kind of a win-win. I mean, well, as best as it can be a win-win, because they don't have to pay a lump sum. They don't have to. It doesn't affect their credit. You still get what's owed you and interest. So,
and here's the thing:
the best that can be dealt with a bad situation.
And that family is still with us.
Well, which is.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, so good. No, well, I think it's a good thing that it all worked out.
Our timing is this is going by so fast, Sean.
Sorry, is that my fault? That
no.
I'm okay.
No, you're subbing in and you're doing great.
Okay, good. I have to say that I remember when we had first opened and before you were on the auto debit, finding out that we would have people that was, so much money, not that much, but that owed the studio. And I would talk to the studio manager and be like, well, how does this happen? Well, and she'd say, well, they just don't pay. And I'm like, well, why don't you, how do they get to take the class if they haven't paid? And they'd be like, well, they just get dropped off. And, just dealing with this idea of, telling a poor child, like, nope, you have to
can't
take class.
You got to call your parent.
Yeah, that's a difficult
situation. Tough. That is tough.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time. Any other big fails you want to share in the time that we have left?
Let's go quickly. So we did have a family that would use our lobby for this is embarrassing. For almost a year, they would use it as very cheap daycare.
I think I remember this. Basically, right? The mother would drop them off
2 or 3 hours early and come and get them like an hour or two later after the class.
They were there for 1 hour of class.
They were there all evening. Wow. All evening from 2:30, 3 o'clock to 8:30 at night.
Now, how would you stop that today from happening?
Oh, I'd speak up so much sooner.
So you would just say after it happened the first time, you say,
we'll let them drop off about 30 minutes early, and we call if they're late. Now that was a big one. Oh, it was so hard.
Yelp reviews. I'm thinking of Yelp reviews. I know.
Yelp.
I think that's probably something everybody deals with.
Yeah.
Or, Yelp and Facebook and so all sort of social media craziness.
There's I have a crazy one that haunts me from 2012. It was after my mom passed, and there was a very tough customer, very tough, and I had to get control of this situation. It was at a recital. I raised my voice, and I got a horrible Yelp review that remains on my page. But you know what? The crazy ones read crazy. Yeah. And the legit ones read legit, and people are smart enough to know the difference. And
I know that when I look at Yelp reviews for other businesses, that I like to look at a couple of 5 stars and a couple of 1 stars. And lots of times you can tell when the 1 stars are like, well, that's sort of a one-off situation. That probably doesn't happen on a regular day, or that person just, I'm like going, well, you're unreasonable. So, you can only hope that most of the people are like, but I know that you've also, when situations have happened that you've kind of come to me and said, I really want to tell this person off or whatever. And I say, yeah, I know that would probably feel really good, but
like I ever would, you know me. That is just not my personality. Yeah. I may want to think it in my head, and I may write a really bad email that I never send.
Yeah, that's true. But I always say it's like it doesn't do you any good. Doesn't help your business. Or that'll be the question I'll say is like, will that really help your business? It'll make you feel better. Yeah. But will it really help your business burning that bridge? Because.
But my biggest mistake of all is not getting a business mentor sooner. I thank my lucky stars. Yeah,
because you don't listen to your husband.
Nope. I thank my lucky stars every day for my Clint, because he has turned my ship around, and all of his experts. And
I can attest to that, just as somebody who's kind of stood on the sidelines and watched that, how it's just been really great to have somebody that you have to keep accountable to, that kind of keps your feet to the flame.
Yeah, all of the experts, and then the DSOA and the inner circle, especially those studio owners. I don't want to let anyone down, so it kind of pushes me to do better and better. And when I'm testing something at my studio, I'm not just testing it for me. I want to make it work so that I can share it with them. And that's really cool. It's a really great feeling. So
how do we wrap this thing up?
We just wrap it up. We just say, usually Angela's like, well, what's your number one lesson for everybody?
So what's your number one lesson for everyone?
Well, for me, overall, what I've realized is that my greatest asset is usually my greatest weakness, and where all my failures stem from. And that's from being a quick start. I start things quickly, rapidly, and big. And though it's brought me lots of success, it has brought me lots of failure. And I just own that, because that's who I am.
That is profound.
Thanks, you guys, so much for listening. It's been a great 8 weeks of podcasting. And if you like it, let Clint know, because we'd love to do it again.
And thanks for letting me be part of this podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode. I hope you got a huge amount of value from the amazing Angela and Jody, who are not only dance studio owners, but they are also members of our Dance Studio Owners Inner Circle program. Now, if you would like more information and resources on how you can grow your dance studio while reclaiming your life, please head to our website, dsoa.com. We'll see you there and see you back next week for another awesome episode.